I parked my dust-covered truck next to a gleam of alpine white metal that was so bright it actually hurt my eyes. 12 hours of inspecting foundation pours had left a film of gray grit on my skin, but my younger sister, Elizabeth, looked pristine. She was posing next to a brand new Porsche Macan, a giant red bow stuck to the hood like a badge of honor. My mother, Susan, didn't even flinch when she saw me. She just smiled that vacant social climber smile and said, "Oh good, you're home. We had to liquidate your master's degree fund. Elizabeth needs the right image for her new director role. You understand, don't you? It's a smart investment. $60,000 gone. Just like that." Before we see how Alexandra handles this betrayal, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My reaction wasn't emotional, it was structural. When a load-bearing wall snaps, you don't argue with gravity, you evacuate. I walked past the champagne toast, the laughter, and the shiny white paint without a word. The hallway smelled like expensive perfume and betrayal. I went straight to my room and closed the door. The lock clicked, and that sound was the only closure I was going to get. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My hands were steady, cold. I pulled up the encrypted file I'd named Protocol Raymond. Raymond was the ousted founder of Sterling Horizons, the man my father had pushed out for being too focused on safety and not enough on profit. For 6 years, I'd been quietly buying up the shadow shares small blocks of equity that my parents thought were worthless. I had exactly 48%. I needed 4% more to kill the board. I typed out the email to Raymond. "It's time. Execute the transfer." I logged into my bank account. My personal savings, plus the inheritance my grandmother had left me, the money my parents didn't know existed, sat there in a lump sum. I initiated the wire transfer. It was every dime I had. I wasn't just buying shares. I was buying a weapon. While the progress bar loaded, I stood up and grabbed my duffel bag. I didn't pack clothes. I packed the blueprints. I packed the soil sample reports my father had ignored. I packed the hard drive containing every safety violation I documented since I was 22. Outside, I could hear Elizabeth squealing as she revved the engine. "Listen to that purr," she shouted. I looked at the loading bar. Transfer complete. They had bought a car for image. I had just bought the roof over their heads for leverage. I zipped the bag shut. The daughter they knew, the one who kept the peace, the one who fixed their mistakes, didn't live here anymore. She had been evicted the moment they signed that check for the Porsche. Now, only the architect remained. And I had a demolition schedule to keep. I stared at the ceiling of the cheap motel room I'd booked for the night. It was stained with water damage, a small, ugly brown circle that reminded me of every job site I'd ever fixed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from my father, Jeffrey. "You're being dramatic. Come home. We need to discuss the insurance for the Porsche. It's under your name for the multi-car discount." I didn't reply. Instead, I thought about the math. For the last 6 years, my life had been measured in concrete pours and sunrise shifts. While Elizabeth was networking at brunch, I was standing in freezing mud at 5 a.m. checking rebar tensile strength. My hands were permanently calloused, hers were manicured. I drove a truck with 200,000 miles on it so I could save every penny for my master's in structural engineering. That fund wasn't gift money from them. It was my blood, sweat, and overtime entrusted to a joint account I thought was safe. But safety was an illusion in the Sterling household. I remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. I had come home with a promotion, excited to tell them I was leading a site survey. My mother, Susan, had cut me off to talk about Elizabeth's anxiety over not having the right wardrobe for an internship interview. "You're so strong, Alexandra," my mother had said, patting my hand like I was a sturdy draft horse. "You always land on your feet. You don't need us the way Elizabeth does. She's delicate. She needs padding." That was the trap. That was the twisted logic that allowed them to sleep at night. They didn't steal my $60,000 because they hated me. They stole it because they penalized my competence. In their minds, robbing me was a compliment. They believed I was tough enough to survive the theft, while Elizabeth was too fragile to survive without the spoils. It was a tax on my resilience. I sat up in the motel bed, the anger settling into a hard, cold knot in my chest. They had weaponized my strength against me. They assumed that because I could handle the burden, I should handle it. They treated my ambition like a natural resource they could strip mine to pave the road for Elizabeth's mediocrity. But a foundation can only bear so much weight before it cracks, and they had just taken a sledgehammer to the load-bearing wall of our relationship. I looked at the text message again. It's under your name. I picked up the phone. I didn't text back. Instead, I opened my insurance app. I scrolled down to the policy. I selected the Porsche Macan. Cancel policy. Effective? Immediately. They wanted to rely on my strength? Fine. Let's see how delicate Elizabeth really was when the safety net was gone. I wasn't their foundation anymore. I was the demolition crew. I checked into a new job site the next week, but my mind was still on the Green Summit Eco Resort. It was Sterling Horizon's flagship project, a massive, high-end development built into the side of a cliff overlooking the Pacific. Elizabeth had been given the lead on it, despite never having managed anything larger than a kitchen remodel. I knew Elizabeth. I knew she cared about vibes and aesthetics. I also knew she didn't know the difference between load-bearing concrete and decorative stucco. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the back of the conference room during the quarterly update meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, but as a site surveyor, I had access. Elizabeth was at the front, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation that was 90% mood boards and 10% actual data. We're going for an organic, seamless flow, she said, gesturing to a rendering of the lobby. Italian marble floors, imported teak beams. It's going to be breathtaking. I raised my hand. The room went quiet. My father, Jeffrey, frowned from the head of the table. Alexandra, he said, his voice warning. We're pressed for time. The soil report for the cliffside indicates high erosion risk, I said, keeping my voice flat. The initial specs called for deep pile steel reinforcement, but I see here, I pointed to the budget sheet projected on the screen, that the steel budget has been cut by 40%. To pay for the marble, Elizabeth laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. Oh, don't be such a buzzkill, Alex. The engineers said standard rebar is fine. We need the marble to sell the luxury experience. You just don't understand the vision. I looked at my father. Dad, standard rebar won't hold that slope in a heavy rain. If you cut the steel to buy floor tiles, you're building a tomb, not a resort. Jeffrey slammed his hand on the table. Enough! You're jealous, Alexandra. You're jealous that your sister has the vision to take this company to the next level while you're stuck in the dirt. Support her or get out. The room was silent. I looked at the faces of the other board members, my uncle, a few family friends. They all looked away. They were enablers, every single one of them. They preferred the pretty lie to the expensive truth. Understood, I said. I stood up and walked out. They thought I was leaving because I was defeated. I wasn't. I was leaving because I needed to go to the site. If they wouldn't listen to reason, I needed proof. I needed to see exactly how thin the paper walls of their empire really were. And I needed to document it before the rain came. The security guard at the Green Summit site knew me. I'd hired him 3 years ago. He let me in at 2 a.m. without asking a single question. Just a silent nod as I drove my truck past the gate. The site was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt heavy. The air smelled of wet earth and impending rain. The weather forecast predicted a major storm system hitting the coast in 72 hours. That was my deadline. I pulled on my boots and grabbed my flashlight. I didn't go to the trailer. I went straight to the supply yard. I found the pallets of concrete mix Elizabeth had ordered. I shone my light on the batch numbers. Type N, masonry cement. My stomach dropped. Type N was for non-load-bearing walls. It was for decoration. The blueprints called for Type S structural strength. Elizabeth had swapped them out because Type N was cheaper and lighter, probably so she could afford the hand-carved teak doors she'd been bragging about on Instagram. I walked to the edge of the cliff where the main deck was being framed. The wind whipped my hair across my face. I looked down at the dark, churning ocean hundreds of feet below. In that moment, the timeline split in my head. I saw the ghost of what would happen if I walked away. I saw the ribbon-cutting ceremony 6 months from now. I saw the first heavy storm of the winter season. I saw the soil liquefy around the inadequate foundation piles. I heard the scream of twisting metal as the rebar snapped. I saw the deck crowded with guests holding champagne slide off the face of the earth. I saw the lawsuits. I saw the headlines. Sterling Horizons resort collapse. 12 dead. I saw my father in a courtroom claiming he didn't know while Elizabeth cried for the cameras. They would lose everything, the money, the reputation, their freedom. I wasn't stealing the company to hurt them. I was stealing it to save them from a manslaughter charge. I pulled out my camera. Click. The Type N bags. Click. The white spacing of the rebar. Click. The soil erosion already starting near the pilings. I spent 4 hours documenting every inch of negligence. I didn't feel like a daughter betraying her family. I felt like a coroner performing an autopsy on a body that wasn't dead yet. By sunrise, I was back in my motel room. I didn't sleep. I uploaded the photos. I cross-referenced the invoices Elizabeth had signed, the ones prioritizing marble over safety, with the building codes. I built a digital binder. I titled it The Collapse Report. It was 50 pages of undeniable physics. It was a death certificate for my father's tenure as CEO. I printed 3 copies, one for the archives, one for the site foreman, and one for the board meeting. I looked at the stack of warm paper. My mother had always told me I was too rigid, too focused on the rules. She said I lacked imagination. She was wrong. I had plenty of imagination. I had just imagined the end of their world, and now I was the only one who could stop it from happening. Physics didn't care about their feelings. Gravity didn't care about their image, and neither did I. I met Raymond at a diner off the highway, halfway between the job site and the city. He was sitting in a booth, nursing a black coffee, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd probably worn when he built the company's first duplex 30 years ago. He looked like a grandfather, but his eyes were sharp as razors. "You look tired, kid," he said, pushing a folder across the table. "I'm fine," I lied. I opened the folder. Inside were the transfer documents for his remaining shares. It was done. I officially owned 52% of Sterling Horizons. I had the majority. I could fire my father. I could fire the board. But a hostile takeover takes time. There are meetings, votes, bylaws. I didn't have time. The storm was coming in 48 hours. "It's not enough," I said, closing the folder. "I have the shares, but I can't call an emergency vote fast enough to stop the eco-resort construction. They're pouring the deck tomorrow." Raymond smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting a long time for this conversation. "You think I sold you my shares just because I needed the money?" he asked. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a second document. It was old, yellowed at the edges, stained with a ring of coffee. "I sold them to you because you're the only one who ever read the fine print." He slid the document over. It was the original company charter from 1992. "Turn to page 14, he said. "Section 4, paragraph B." I flipped the pages. The legibility was fading, but the words were clear. The poison pill clause. I read it silently. "In the event that any executive officer authorizes the expenditure of company funds on non-essential aesthetic improvements while knowingly neglecting fundamental structural safety standards defined as fiscal mismanagement, the majority shareholder reserves the right to dissolve the board of directors immediately without a vote and assume sole executive control. My breath hitched. It was a kill switch. Raymond had written it in after his first partner tried to use cheap lumber to build a luxury gazebo. He had anticipated my father before my father even took over. Elizabeth's marble invoice, I whispered. And the cut steel budget. That's your smoking gun, Raymond said. They prioritized aesthetic improvements over structural safety. They triggered the clause. You don't need a vote, Alexandra. You just need to walk into that room and pull the trigger. I looked at him. Why didn't you use this when Dad pushed you out? Because he hadn't endangered anyone yet, Raymond said. He was just greedy. Now, he's dangerous, and you're the only one who can stop him. He stood up and dropped a $5 bill on the table. Go get him, architect. I watched him leave. I looked down at the charter. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a loaded gun. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was fighting a losing battle. I felt like I was about to win the war. I walked into the Sterling Horizons headquarters at 8:55 a.m. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock. The receptionist tried to stop me, saying my clearance had been revoked, but I kept walking. I didn't need clearance. I owned the building. I pushed open the double mahogany doors to the boardroom. The conversation stopped instantly. My father, Jeffrey, was at the head of the table. Elizabeth stood next to a large easel, pointing to a glossy rendering of the Green Summit lobby. It looked like a palace. Alexandra? Jeffrey stood up, his face reddening. You are not welcome here. Security. Sit down, Dad, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a diamond saw. I walked to the table. I didn't sit. I placed my muddy hard hat directly onto the polished wood, right next to Elizabeth's pristine laptop. Then, I dropped 2 stacks of paper. The first was the collapse report. The second was the invoice for the Italian marble. What is this? Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling slightly. That, I said, pointing to the report, is the autopsy of your resort. And that, I pointed to the invoice, is the murder weapon. The board members, mostly old friends of my father, shifted uncomfortably. I did a site audit, I explained, addressing the room. The foundation is compromised, the concrete is type N masonry mix, not structural. The rebar is spaced 20 inches apart, not 12. And the soil erosion on the north cliff face has already begun. If you pour that deck tomorrow, it will slide into the ocean within 6 months. And it will take 50 people with it. You're lying, Elizabeth snapped. The engineers signed off on it. The engineers you hired because they were cheap, I countered. Or the ones who quit last month? Jeffrey slammed his hand on the table. Enough of this. You're trying to sabotage your sister because you're bitter about the car. Get out, or I'll have you arrested for corporate espionage. You bought a car, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I bought the company. I pulled the final document from my bag, the transfer confirmation from Raymond. I own 52% of Sterling Horizons, I said. And according to the original company charter, specifically the poison pill clause regarding fiscal mismanagement and safety negligence, I am dissolving this board. Effective immediately. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing shut. You can't do that, my mother whispered from the corner of the room. I just did, I replied. You prioritized image over substance. You built a facade and called it a legacy. But a facade needs a foundation to stand on. And without my money, without my competence, you have nothing. I looked at Elizabeth. She looked small, fragile, the delicate flower they had always protected. You wanted the title, I told her. You wanted the office. You wanted the car. You have them, but you don't have a company anymore because you don't know how to build one. You only know how to decorate one. I turned to the security guard who had just entered. Escort them out, all of them. I watched from the window as security escorted my parents and Elizabeth to the parking lot. They looked confused, angry, and small. Elizabeth got into her white Porsche, but for the first time, it didn't look like a trophy. It looked like a getaway car. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt heavy. But it was the good kind of heavy, the weight of responsibility, not burden. I picked up the phone and dialed Raymond. "It's done," I said. "Come back. We have a resort to fix." The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. I sold the Porsche, I sold the office furniture, I liquidated every asset that wasn't bolted down to pay for the steel reinforcement the resort actually needed. I rehired the old engineering team. We worked double shifts. We tore down the decorative walls and poured structural concrete. 6 months later, I stood on the main deck of the Green Summit Eco Resort. The storm season had just passed. The winds had been brutal, 60 miles per hour, battering the cliffside for 3 days straight. The deck hadn't moved an inch. The air smelled of salt and rain, but underneath it all, I could smell the concrete. It smelled like safety. It smelled like integrity. I leaned against the railing, finally breathing easy. My family had built a house of cards. I had poured a foundation of stone. And as I looked out at the vast, unbreakable ocean, I knew that no matter what storms came next, I was ready. The structure was sound. If you believe that character is built on foundations, not facades, hit that share button and tell me in the comments, what's one shiny object someone tried to distract you with while they were cutting corners?